stumbling upon a bleeding German shepherd and her freezing litter in the brutal depths of a Montana winter. A reclusive combat veteran assumed he was simply taking in some unfortunate strays. He couldn't have been more wrong. The animal he rescued was actually a highly classified Delta Force operative, officially pronounced dead, and she was carrying a burden that had already cost her handler his life. What initially seemed like a compassionate rescue mission in the snow was rapidly deteriorating into a lethal standoff, and the astonishing truth she brought to his isolated cabin was bound to leave him speechless. The wind howled through the Bitterroot Mountains like a wounded animal, rattling the heavy timber frame of Abel Mitchell's isolated cabin. Abel, a 42-year-old former Marine Force recon sniper, sat in the dark, watching the embers of his wood stove pulse with a dying orange glow. He had spent the last 5 years living completely off the grid, 50 miles from the nearest town of Darby, Montana. He preferred the harsh, unforgiving cold of the wilderness to the suffocating noise of civilization. The mountains didn't ask questions. They didn't care about the shrapnel scars crisscrossing his left shoulder, and they certainly didn't care about the nightmares of Kandahar that still jolted him awake in a cold sweat at 3 in the morning. It was mid-January, and a historic blizzard had already dumped 3 feet of snow on the valley floor. The temperature had plummeted to 20 below zero. Abel was sipping a mug of bitter black coffee, preparing to lock down for the night, when he heard it. It wasn't the wind. It was a faint, rhythmic thumping, followed by a sound that made his blood run cold. A low, agonizing whimper. Abel set his mug down on the rough-hewn oak table. He didn't hesitate. He pulled on his insulated Carhartt coveralls, strapped his heavy Danner boots, and slung his customized Remington 870 shotgun over his shoulder. In these woods, a sound like that usually meant a mountain lion or a grizzly that had woken early from hibernation. He stepped out onto the porch, the freezing air instantly biting at his exposed cheeks. He clicked on his high-lumen tactical flashlight, cutting a brilliant white swath through the driving snow. He swept the beam across the tree line, past the cord of chopped firewood, and toward the rusted-out chassis of an old 1978 Ford F-250 that the previous owner had abandoned near the edge of the property. The whimpering came again. It was emanating from beneath the truck. Abel waded through the waist-deep snow, keeping his shotgun raised. As he rounded the rusted tailgate, he lowered the flashlight and froze. Huddled in the frozen mud and ice beneath the rear axle was a German shepherd. She was horrifyingly emaciated, her ribs jutting sharply against her matted black and tan coat. But she wasn't alone. Tucked tightly against her belly, sheltered from the lethal wind by her own freezing body, were 3 tiny, squirming puppies. They couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. The mother dog didn't growl as Abel approached. She just looked up at him. Abel had seen a lot of death in his life. He had seen the eyes of men who knew it was their time. This dog had those same eyes. She was exhausted, broken, and shivering violently, yet she maintained a protective, rigid posture over her litter. "Easy, girl," Abel muttered, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. He slowly knelt in the snow, slinging the shotgun back over his shoulder to show his empty hands. "I'm not going to hurt you." As he got closer, the flashlight illuminated a horrifying detail. The snow beneath the dog's hind leg was stained a deep, frozen crimson. She was bleeding heavily. Abel gently reached out. The dog flinched but didn't snap. When Abel brushed the matted fur away from her flank, his breath hitched. It was a clean, deep laceration, surrounded by a ring of blackened, necrotic tissue. Abel had been a combat medic before he became a sniper. He knew exactly what he was looking at. This wasn't an animal bite. It wasn't a scrape from a jagged rock. It was a gunshot wound. A bullet had grazed her hindquarter, narrowly missing the femoral artery. Someone had tried to kill her. Abel stripped off his heavy gloves. He reached under the heavy shepherd, marveling at her sheer weight even in her starved state, and scooped her up into his arms. She let out a sharp gasp of pain but remained completely docile, as if she understood he was her only chance. "Hold on," Abel whispered. He carried the heavy dog through the raging blizzard, kicking his cabin door open and gently laying her on the braided rug right in front of the wood stove. He immediately ran back out into the freezing storm, plunging his hands into the icy den beneath the truck to retrieve the 3 puppies. They were like little blocks of ice, barely whining, their life force slipping away by the second. Back inside, Abel went to work with the cold, calculated efficiency of a man who had spent his life in war zones. He stoked the fire until the cast-iron stove radiated intense heat. He wrapped the puppies in a heated wool blanket, placing them close to the warmth, and then turned his attention to the mother. He pulled out his olive-drab tactical medical kit. He flushed the gunshot wound with saline, applied a heavy dose of broad-spectrum antibiotic ointment, and quickly stitched the deepest part of the laceration to stop the slow oozing of blood. The dog lay perfectly still. She didn't whine, didn't struggle, didn't even need to be held down. She just watched him with sharp, intelligent amber eyes. It was then, as Abel was cleaning the blood from her ears, that he saw it. Deep inside her right ear flap, obscured by dirt and dried blood, was a tattoo. Abel grabbed a damp cloth and wiped the area clean. A sequence of blue-inked numbers and letters revealed itself. K9774B. Right below the numbers was a tiny, unmistakable stamp. It was an eagle clutching an anchor, a trident, and a flintlock pistol. The Delta Force trident. Abel sat back on his heels, his heart hammering against his ribs. The silence of the cabin was suddenly deafening. "Who the hell are you?" Abel whispered, staring at the dog. She wasn't a stray. She was a Tier 1 tactical asset, a highly trained weapon of the United States military. And someone had shot her and left her to die in the Montana wilderness. For the next 48 hours, Abel barely slept. The blizzard outside raged on, burying the cabin under another foot of snow. But inside, a tense, quiet battle for survival was taking place. Abel boiled chicken and rice, feeding it to the mother dog in small, measured handfuls so her starved stomach wouldn't reject it. He named her tentatively, calling her Sarge in his head, but she didn't respond to it. She ate ravenously but with a strange, disciplined grace. The puppies, warmed by the fire and finally able to nurse from their recovering mother, began to show signs of life, letting out tiny, high-pitched barks that echoed off the log walls. But the mother dog, she was different. Despite her severe injuries, she didn't act like a wounded animal. By the second evening, she forced herself to stand. She ignored the obvious pain in her stitched hind leg and began to patrol the perimeter of the small cabin. She limped from the heavy front door to the frost-covered windows, sniffing the seals, listening to the wind, standing guard. She was establishing a perimeter. Abel watched her from his armchair, cleaning his disassembled rifle. "You're a long way from Coronado, girl," he said softly. He needed answers, and he only knew one man who could give them to him without asking too many questions in return. Abel pulled a heavy black satellite phone from a locked metal footlocker under his bed. It was a relic from his contracting days, fully encrypted. He walked over to the frost-covered window, waiting for the digital display to find a signal through the heavy snow clouds. When the green light flashed, he dialed a secure Washington, D.C. number. The phone rang 4 times before a gruff, tired voice answered. "This is an unlisted, secure line. State your authorization. Arthur, it's Mitchell. I need a favor." There was a long pause on the other end. Arthur Penhaligon was a senior logistics analyst at the Department of Defense. He and Abel went back 20 years, surviving a brutal ambush in Fallujah, when Arthur was just a fresh-faced intelligence officer. "Abel? Jesus Christ, man. You've been a ghost for 3 years. I thought you finally drank yourself to death in those damn mountains." "Not yet," Abel said, his eyes never leaving the German shepherd, who had now sat down by the door, staring intently at the handle. "Artie, I need you to run a serial number. It's a K9 asset tattoo." Arthur sighed heavily. "Abel, I'm at a desk in the Pentagon trying to manage supply chains for 3 different theaters. I don't run dog tags for lost pets." "She's not a pet, Artie. She's carrying a trident stamp. The number is K9774 Bravo." The line went dead silent. Abel could hear the faint, rapid clicking of a keyboard in the background. A minute passed. Then 2. Artie? Where did you get that number, Abel? Arthur's voice had lost all its casual annoyance. It was suddenly tight, laced with a very real, very dangerous tension. I found her under a truck on my property. Shot, starved, and nursing 3 pups. Who is she? Abel? Listen to me very carefully, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. You need to walk away from that animal right now. Put her back outside. Shoot her yourself if you have to. Just get rid of her. Abel's grip on the phone tightened. I don't leave wounded behind, Artie. You know that. Tell me who she is. Arthur cursed softly under his breath. Her designation is Freya. She's a Belgian Malinois cross, with German Shepherd bloodlines. Top tier. She was attached to Naval Special Warfare Development Group, SEAL Team 6. Her handler was Chief Petty Officer David Cooper. Was. Abel caught the past tense. Cooper is dead, Abel. He died in a single-vehicle car crash outside Seattle 3 weeks ago. His truck went off an embankment, burst into flames. Closed casket. Enoflast. Abel frowned, looking at Freya. The dog was now looking back at him, her ears swiveled toward the phone. Okay. The handler died. Tragic. But why is the dog running through the Montana wilderness with a bullet hole in her leg? That's the problem, Abel, Arthur said, his voice trembling slightly. Freya didn't survive the crash. Officially, her records show she was severely injured in combat 6 months ago and developed untreatable aggression. The file says Freya was euthanized by military veterinarians a month before Cooper died. Abel felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the drafty cabin. You're telling me I have a dead man's dog, who is also officially dead, sitting in my living room. I'm telling you that whatever you stumbled into, it's a massive cover-up, Arthur said urgently. Cooper was working deep cover maritime interdiction. We think he uncovered something massive, cartel money, weapons smuggling, maybe a leak inside his own command. If Freya is alive, it means Cooper hid her before he was killed. And if someone just shot her on your property, it means they tracked her. They're looking for her, Abel, and now they're going to find you. Let them come, Abel said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy calm. Don't be a hero, Mitchell. You've been out of the game too long. These aren't street thugs. If they are hunting a Tier 1 dog in a blizzard, they are highly trained, highly motivated professionals. I'm going to try to send a federal extraction team to your coordinates, but with this weather, it'll take them 24 hours. Take your time, Artie, Abel said. He hung up the phone. He looked over at Freya. The dog hadn't moved. Abel slowly raised his hand, forming his fingers into a tight, closed fist. The silent, tactical hand signal for hold position. Freya instantly dropped her belly to the floor, her eyes locked on Abel's, completely silent, waiting for the next command. She was a disciplined, lethal weapon, and she was terrified of whoever was coming for her. Abel walked over to his weapons locker. It was time to wake up the ghosts. The third day brought a cruel, deceptive break in the weather. The blizzard abruptly stopped, leaving behind a blindingly bright, cloudless sky. The temperature hovered around 0, and the vast expanse of the Bitterroot Valley was buried under a pristine, unbroken sea of white. Inside the cabin, Abel was moving with a terrifying, silent efficiency. He had transformed his home into a fortress. He dragged the heavy oak dining table against the front door, barricading it. He pulled the thick blackout curtains over the windows, leaving only a 2-inch gap at the edges for a line of sight. His Remington 700 sniper rifle rested on a bipod near the front window, loaded with armor-piercing rounds. His shotgun and a customized Glock 19 were staged on the kitchen counter. Freya watched him with intense focus. The dog seemed to understand exactly what was happening. She had abandoned the puppies to their warm basket, near the stove, and had taken up a position right beside Abel. Abel knelt beside her, examining her wound. The swelling had gone down, and there was no sign of infection. She was a survivor. Cooper didn't just hide you to keep you safe, did he? Abel whispered, stroking the thick fur on her neck. A pregnant war dog running through the woods. You were leading them away. You were the decoy. Freya leaned her heavy head against Abel's chest, a rare moment of vulnerability. As he ran his hands over her thick tactical collar, a heavy-duty nylon band that she still wore, he felt something hard stitched into the lining. Abel frowned. He pulled a folding knife from his pocket and carefully sliced the thick nylon thread of the collar. Hidden deep inside a waterproof lining was a tiny, black micro SD card. Abel stared at it. This was what David Cooper died for. This was why a team of killers was hunting a pregnant dog through a blizzard. Whatever was on this drive was dangerous enough to kill a Delta Force, and important enough that Cooper trusted his dying dog to carry it into the wilderness. Suddenly, Freya's head snapped up, her ears pinned back tight against her skull. She didn't bark. A poorly trained dog would have barked, giving away their position. Freya was trained by the best of the best. Instead, she let out a sound so low Abel felt it in his boots, rather than heard it, a deep, vibrating, menacing growl. She stood up, ignoring her injured leg, and locked her eyes on the heavy wooden door. Abel instantly grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. For a long moment, there was nothing but the glaring white of the snow-covered pines. Then, he heard it, the heavy, rhythmic crunch of snow chains. A vehicle was creeping up his mile-long, unplowed private driveway. No local would attempt this road in a two-wheel drive truck, and no lost hiker had an engine that sounded like that. It was a heavy-duty diesel, purring with immense power. Through the narrow slit in the curtains, Abel saw the nose of a black, heavily modified Chevrolet Tahoe break through the tree line. It was completely unmarked. Its windows tinted pitch black. It lacked a front license plate. It rolled to a stop about 60 yards from the cabin, partially shielded by a massive, snow-laden Douglas fir. Abel flicked the safety off his rifle. His heart rate slowed. The familiar, icy calm of combat washed over him. The ghosts of Kandahar retreated, replaced by the razor-sharp focus of the present. 4 doors opened simultaneously. 4 men stepped out into the knee-deep snow. They weren't wearing police uniforms. They weren't wearing hunter's orange. They were dressed in high-end, white, winter camouflage. They wore Kevlar plate carriers and carried short-barreled, suppressed M4 carbines. They moved with a terrifying, synchronized fluidity, instantly fanning out to secure the perimeter of the cabin. These were professional operators, mercenaries, and they had come to tie up loose ends. "Looks like we found the stray," a voice crackled through a megaphone from the Tahoe. The voice was calm, almost bored. "Abel Mitchell, we know who you are. We know your service record. We have immense respect for what you did in the sandbox. But this doesn't concern you. Open the door, send the dog out, and we will get back in our truck and leave you to your peace and quiet. You have 60 seconds. Abel looked down at Freya. She was standing at attention, her amber eyes burning with a fierce, protective fire. She glanced at Abel, then back at the door. "They're lying," Abel whispered to the dog. "They kill the dog. They kill the witnesses." He reached out and gave Freya a single, sharp hand signal, 2 fingers pointed toward the rear exit of the cabin. Freya understood instantly. She silently limped toward the back door, melting into the shadows of the kitchen, ready to flank. Abel settled his eye behind the scope of his rifle. He aimed the crosshairs squarely at the engine block of the black Tahoe. 50 seconds, Mitchell." The voice echoed across the snow. "Don't die for a dead man's mutt." Abel took a slow, deep breath, feeling the cold air fill his lungs. He wasn't the broken, hollow man he had been a week ago. He had a mission. He had a family to protect. His finger tightened on the trigger. The roar of the Remington 700 shattered the frozen silence of the valley. The .308 armor-piercing round tore through the frigid air, traveling the 60 yards in a fraction of a second. It punched straight through the heavy grille of the black Tahoe, bypassing the radiator, and buried itself deep into the cast-iron engine block. Steam and black smoke instantly geysered from the hood as the massive diesel engine seized and died with a violent metallic shriek. "Contact!" One of the men in white camouflage yelled, diving into the deep snow. The response was instantaneous. A hail of suppressed 5.56 millimeters gunfire hammered the front of the cabin. The thwack, thwack, thwack of bullets biting into the thick log walls sounded like a swarm of angry hornets. Glass shattered inward as the front windows disintegrated, spraying Abel with jagged shards. He had already dropped below the sill, cycling the bolt of his rifle with practiced, fluid speed. He didn't fire blindly. Ammo was finite. Discipline was everything. Abel crawled across the floorboards, avoiding the streams of moonlight piercing the dust-filled room. He reached a secondary shooting port he had prepared earlier, a small knothole in the heavy timber near the base of the wall. He peered through. The 4 operators had bounded to cover. 2 were behind the smoking Tahoe, laying down suppressing fire. The other 2 had split up, attempting to flank the cabin through the dense pines. They were moving in a textbook-bounding overwatch. These weren't cartel thugs. They were moving like Delta, or DEVGRU. They're moving to the blind spots, Abel muttered. He left the sniper rifle on the floor and snatched up the customized Remington 870 shotgun, racking a shell into the chamber. It was loaded with .00 buckshot, perfect for close quarters. He moved silently toward the kitchen at the rear of the cabin. The heavy blackout curtains absorbed the little light there was, leaving the room in pitch blackness. Suddenly, a shadow detached itself from the pantry. It was Freya. The German shepherd moved without a sound, her limp practically invisible, as adrenaline flooded her system. She looked up at Abel, her amber eyes catching a glint of the moonlight. Abel gave a short downward swipe of his hand. Stay low. Wait. Freya flattened herself against the linoleum. Outside, the crunch of snow revealed a heavy, deliberate footstep on the back porch. 3, 2, 1. A heavy breaching charge detonated against the reinforced deadbolt of the back door. The explosion blew the heavy wooden frame completely off its hinges, sending it crashing onto the kitchen island. Smoke and wood splinters filled the air. A figure in white winter gear stepped through the threshold, sweeping his M4 carbine left to right, a green laser sight cutting through the smoke. Abel didn't have a clear shot. The operator was heavily armored, and the angle was wrong. But Abel didn't need to take the shot. Before the mercenary could register the layout of the kitchen, a 60-pound blur of black and tan fur launched from the shadows. Freya didn't bark. She didn't growl. She executed a perfect, silent kinetic strike. She hit the operator square in the chest, her jaws clamping down with bone-crushing force on his right forearm, pinning his weapon away from her body. The man let out a muffled scream of surprise and pain, stumbling backward into the doorframe. With her jaws locked, Freya thrashed her head violently, throwing the man off balance. As he reached down with his left hand to draw a sidearm, Abel stepped from the shadows. The shotgun roared in the confined space. The blast caught the operator in the unarmored gap beneath his armpit. He crumpled to the floor, motionless. Freya released her grip instantly and retreated to Abel's side, panting softly, her ears swiveling to track the sounds outside. Good girl, Abel breathed, his heart hammering against his ribs. He quickly dragged the downed man out of the doorway and patted him down. No identification. Sterile gear. Suppressed Daniel Defense MK-18 rifle. High-end, night vision. These guys had blank checks backing them. Status. A voice barked through a comms earpiece the dead man was wearing. Bravo. 2. Report. Abel crushed the earpiece beneath his boot. He had taken one out, but 3 remained, and they now knew the back door was a fatal funnel. The gunfire from the front of the cabin had ceased. The sudden silence was more terrifying than the noise. They were regrouping. They were going to burn the cabin down. He had maybe 5 minutes. Abel sprinted back into the living room, grabbing his heavy tactical backpack. He stuffed it with spare magazines, a first aid kit, and survival gear. Then, he turned to the basket near the wood stove. The 3 puppies were huddled together, whining softly at the noise and the sudden drop in temperature as cold air rushed in through the blown door. Abel grabbed a thick, insulated wool blanket, wrapped all 3 puppies securely inside it, and placed them gently into the main compartment of the backpack, leaving a small gap for air. All right, Sarge. Abel said to Freya, slinging the heavy pack onto his back. Time to see what Cooper died for. We need to know who we're fighting. Abel dragged a heavy, fireproof lockbox from beneath his bed. Inside was a ruggedized Panasonic Toughbook, a relic from his days doing off-the-books security contracting in the Middle East. It was thick, heavy, and completely disconnected from the modern internet. It ran a custom, heavily encrypted Linux operating system. He set it on the floor, shielding the screen's glow with his body, and powered it up. He pulled the tiny, blood-flecked micro SD card from his pocket, the one he had cut from Freya's tactical collar, and slid it into the side port. A password prompt instantly flashed onto the screen. Encryption level. AES 256. Abel cursed under his breath. He was a sniper, not a hacker. He had 3 guesses before a drive like this typically wiped itself clean. Think, Abel. What would a dead seal use? He muttered. He typed in Cooper's last name. Incorrect. He typed in the date of Cooper's supposed death. Incorrect. 1 attempt left. The prompt flashed an angry red. Abel looked over at Freya. The dog was watching him, her head tilted slightly. You're the key, aren't you? Abel whispered. He looked at the tattoo inside her ear again, K9774B. He carefully typed it into the prompt, holding his breath as his finger hovered over the enter key. He pressed it. The screen flickered, went black, and then flooded with files, spreadsheets, PDF documents, and a single high-definition video file labeled Evidence 1. Abel clicked the video. It was shaky. Shot from a concealed body camera in what looked like a massive, dimly lit shipping warehouse. Abel recognized the layout. It was a port facility. The timestamp indicated it was recorded 2 months ago in San Diego. 2 men were standing near an open shipping container. The container was packed to the ceiling with wooden crates stamped with United States military ordnance codes. M136 AT-4 anti-tank weapons, crates of C-4 plastic explosives, and advanced night vision optics. One of the men was a known cartel Lieutenant Abel recognized from old briefing packets. The other man was wearing a U.S. Army dress uniform. The camera zoomed in. The military man turned his head. Abel felt the blood drain from his face. He knew that face. It was Colonel Richard Sterling, a highly decorated logistics commander operating out of Special Operations Command. Sterling had access to the movement of billions of dollars of classified hardware. My God, Abel whispered. He's ghosting armory shipments directly to the Sinaloa cartel and passing it off as combat losses in the Middle East. Cooper had figured it out. He had gathered the evidence, and Sterling had found out. Sterling ordered the hit on Cooper, framed it as a car crash, and then tried to erase the dog who had been present during the evidence drop. Abel's secure satellite phone buzzed violently on the floor. He picked it up. Arthur, tell me you have good news. Abel, you need to get out of there right now. Arthur's voice was panicked, completely stripped of its usual bureaucratic calm. The extraction team I requested. I was bypassed. The orders were intercepted by CENTCOM Logistics. A JSOC black bag team was dispatched to your coordinates 4 hours ago. The authorization signature. Abel. It was Colonel Richard Sterling. I know, Abel said, his voice terrifyingly flat. I'm looking at a video of him selling AT-4S to the cartel right now. Cooper put the evidence on an SD card and hid it in the dog's collar. Listen to me, Arthur pleaded. Sterling knows you have the dog. If he knows you have the drive, he will level that mountain to bury you. You have to run. I am wiping all records of this call. I'm wiping your file from the DoD servers. I'm making you a ghost again. If they catch you, I can't help you. Understood, Abel said. Go dark, Artie. Stay safe. He hung up the phone and smashed it with the heel of his boot, grinding the internal SIM card into dust. A sudden, sharp thud hit the roof of the cabin, followed by the hiss of escaping gas. Abel smelled it instantly. White phosphorus, incendiary grenades. They weren't trying to breach anymore. They were going to burn the cabin to the ground and sift through the ashes. Smoke began to pour through the ceiling planks. Time to go, Sarge, Abel said, snapping the tough book shut and shoving it into his pack next to the sleeping puppies. He grabbed his rifle, his shotgun, and threw a heavy, white winter camouflage parka over his gear. He opened a trapdoor hidden beneath the living room rug. It didn't lead to a basement. It was a root cellar that connected to an old, buried drainage pipe that surfaced 20 yards behind the cabin, right inside the old woodshed. "In," Abel commanded, pointing to the dark hole. Freya didn't hesitate. She dropped into the darkness. Abel followed, pulling the trapdoor shut just as the roof of his cabin erupted into a blinding, white-hot inferno. The stench of burning pine and melting tar paper filled the drainage pipe. Abel crawled rapidly through the darkness, the heavy backpack scraping against the corrugated metal. He could hear the muffled roar of the fire consuming his home of 5 years above him, followed by the systematic, rhythmic gunfire of the mercenaries shooting through the walls. Just to be sure, he reached the grate at the end of the pipe, kicked it loose, and spilled out into the freezing, dark interior of the woodshed. Freya was already there, shaking the dirt from her coat. Resting in the center of the shed, covered by a heavy tarp, was Abel's escape plan. A modified Polaris RMK snowmobile. He had stripped it down, painted it matte white, and bypassed the governor for maximum torque. "Hold on, girl," Abel whispered. He climbed onto the seat, strapping the heavy backpack tightly to his chest so his body heat would keep the puppies warm. He patted the space behind him on the long saddle. "Up!" Freya hopped up, her claws digging into the thick vinyl, and pressed her body tight against Abel's back. Through the slats of the shed, Abel could see the blazing inferno of his cabin lighting up the snow-covered clearing like a second sun. The 3 remaining mercenaries were standing near the tree line, watching the fire, their weapons lowered. They thought it was over. Abel reached over and grabbed a heavy red jerry can of gasoline. He unscrewed the cap, splashed the fuel over the stacks of dry cordwood near the shed door, and trailed it outside. He pulled a flare from his vest, struck the cap, and tossed it onto the soaked wood. Whoosh! A wall of flame erupted from the shed, drawing the immediate attention of the mercenaries. "Start," Abel prayed, turning the key of the snowmobile. The 2-stroke engine screamed to life with a deafening, aggressive roar. Before the mercenaries could raise their rifles, Abel squeezed the throttle. The snowmobile exploded out of the burning shed, the studded treads tearing a massive roost of snow and mud into the air. "He's running. Left flank," one of the operators screamed. Gunfire chased them. Bullets snapped through the air, zipping past Abel's helmet and punching holes through the plastic cowling of the snowmobile. Abel kept his head low, weaving violently through the dense, snow-laden pines. He knew these woods blindly. The mercenaries did not. He aimed for the steepest, most treacherous part of the mountain, the Devil's Wash. It was a narrow, winding ravine, choked with deadfall and deep powder, impassable on foot and suicide in a truck. He checked his rearview mirror. The black Tahoe was dead, but a single headlight was bouncing wildly through the trees behind him. One of the operators had unloaded a specialized tactical snowbike from the back of the Tahoe. It was lighter, faster, and highly maneuverable. The pursuer was gaining ground. The high-pitched whine of the dirt bike engine cutting through the cold air. Abel pushed the Polaris to its absolute limit, the suspension bottoming out as he launched over hidden logs and snow-covered boulders. Freya clung to the seat behind him, her center of gravity flawlessly shifting with every violent turn. A bullet slammed into the rear suspension frame of the Polaris, sending a shower of sparks into the snow. The pursuer was within 50 yards, firing an SMG one-handed while steering the snowbike. "Take the wheel," Abel yelled, mostly to himself. He locked his left arm around the handlebars, maintaining the throttle, and unslung the Remington shotgun with his right hand. He didn't brake. Braking would mean death. Instead, he forced the snowmobile into a violent, sliding skid, turning the machine broadside into the deep powder. The pursuer, caught off guard by the sudden maneuver, had to swerve sharply to avoid slamming into Abel. As the snowbike rocketed past, Abel tracked him. He leveled the shotgun and pulled the trigger. The heavy recoil wrenched his shoulder, but the blast of .00 buckshot caught the rear track of the snowbike. The heavy rubber tread shredded instantly, the bike violently completely out of control, catapulting the mercenary over the handlebars. The man slammed into the trunk of a massive pine tree with a sickening crunch and fell limp into the snow. Abel didn't stop to check on him. He righted the snowmobile and gunned the engine, plunging deeper into the unforgiving darkness of the Bitterroot wilderness. They rode for 2 hours, navigating purely by moonlight and Abel's intimate knowledge of the terrain, until the fuel gauge tapped empty. They were 20 miles from the ruined cabin, deep inside a protected wilderness area where no vehicle could follow. Abel brought the dying machine to a halt beneath the sprawling canopy of an ancient cedar tree. The silence of the forest crashed down on them, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine. He killed the ignition and slowly dismounted. Adrenaline was fading, and the brutal cold was seeping back into his bones. He unclipped the heavy backpack from his chest and unzipped the main compartment. The 3 puppies were curled tightly together in the wool blanket, fast asleep and perfectly warm. Freya leaped down from the snowmobile, sniffing the backpack urgently before looking up at Abel, her tail giving a single tentative wag. "We made it, Sarge," Abel breathed, leaning against the tree. As he shifted his weight, a sudden blinding flash of pain ripped through his left side. He gasped, dropping to one knee in the snow. He reached under his heavy parka, his hand pressing against his ribs. When he pulled his hand away, his glove was soaked in warm black blood. He had taken a ricochet during the escape. He was bleeding out in the middle of nowhere, miles from civilization, with a target on his back, carrying a dead man's dog, 3 puppies, and a secret that could tear the Pentagon apart. Abel looked at Freya. The dog had moved closer, pressing her warm side against him, her intelligent eyes filled with understanding. "All right," Abel whispered, pulling a roll of gauze from his pocket and gritting his teeth. "Let's see how much fight we have left." The pain was a living, breathing entity inside Abel's ribcage. It wasn't the clean, piercing agony of a direct impact. It was the dull, grinding torment of a ricochet. A deformed piece of a 5.56 millimeters jacket had skipped off the snowmobile's chassis and punched through the heavy layers of his Carhartt parka, burying itself in the fleshy meat over his lower left ribs. He leaned heavily against the rough bark of the ancient cedar, his breathing coming in shallow, ragged gasps that plumed like dragon's breath in the freezing air. The temperature was plunging back toward 20 below zero. If he didn't stop the bleeding and get moving, hypothermia would finish the job the mercenaries started. "Okay, Sarge," Abel grunted, his voice tight. "Let's see what we've got." Freya whined softly, a low rumble in her throat. She stepped close, her thick coat pressing against his uninjured side, instinctively sharing her body heat. Abel reached into his tactical vest and pulled out his blowout kit. His fingers, already stiffening from the cold, fumbled with the zipper. He peeled back the blood-soaked layers of his clothing. The wound was ugly, a jagged tear about 3 inches long, leaking dark venous blood down his flank. Fortunately, it hadn't penetrated the chest cavity. He didn't have a sucking chest wound. Not yet, anyway. He pulled a packet of quick-clot combat gauze from the kit. "This is going to suck," he whispered to the empty forest. He ripped the package open with his teeth, took a deep breath of the razor-sharp air, and shoved the chemically treated gauze directly into the wound channel. The burn was instantaneous and blinding. The hemostatic agents in the gauze reacted with the blood, creating a rapid clot that felt like someone was holding a branding iron to his side. Abel bit down hard on the collar of his coat, a muffled groan escaping his lips. Freya licked his cheek, a rapid, anxious motion. She understood trauma. She had seen it on the battlefields of Syria and the Horn of Africa. "I'm all right, girl. I'm all right," Abel wheezed, his forehead resting against the snow-covered roots of the tree. He wrapped a thick Israeli bandage tightly around his torso to secure the packing, pulling it agonizingly tight to apply pressure. He slumped back, exhausted. He had a few hours of fuel left in his own body. Maybe less. He looked at the heavy backpack resting in the snow. He unzipped it. Just an inch. The 3 puppies were huddled together in a tight, furry ball, insulated by the wool. They were alive, but they wouldn't survive another 24 hours in the wild. Abel pulled the frozen, encrypted Panasonic Toughbook from the pack. The SD card was still safely taped to the chassis. He had the evidence that could bring down Colonel Richard Sterling and his entire black market armory ring. But evidence was useless if it died in the snow with him. His satellite phone was destroyed. He had no comms. He was a ghost, which meant no one was coming for him. He needed an uplink. A secure, high-bandwidth connection to dump the video file directly to the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the encrypted servers of the Inspector General. He needed to make the information public. Once it was out, Sterling's power would evaporate, and the hunt would end. There was only one place within 50 miles that had that kind of hardware. Elias Abel muttered. Elias Stanton was a former NSA signals intelligence analyst who had gone quietly insane after a botched operation in Yemen. He now lived as a paranoid hermit in an abandoned silver mining compound high in the Sapphire Mountains, overlooking the town of Phillipsburg. Elias hated the government, he hated people, but he loved Abel, mostly because Abel had carried him out of a collapsing building in Sana'a 12 years ago. It was a 20-mile trek through the most brutal alpine terrain in Montana. Abel forced himself to stand. The world tilted violently, black spots dancing in his peripheral vision. He grabbed a handful of pristine snow and shoved it against his face, letting the shocking cold snap his brain back to attention. He strapped the backpack back onto his chest, securing the puppies. He didn't have a snowmobile anymore. The fuel was gone. They would have to walk. "We're going on a hike, Sarge," Abel said, his voice dropping into the flat, emotionless register of a Marine preparing for a forced march. Freya took the point. The German shepherd moved with an eerie, silent grace, her nose to the wind. Despite her own stitched leg, she didn't limp. The adrenaline and her elite training had completely taken over. She was back on mission. They moved like ghosts through the deep timber. The silence was absolute, broken only by the crunch of Abel's boots and the steady, rhythmic panting of the dog. Hour after hour, they climbed. The elevation gain was brutal. Every step sent a jolt of fire through Abel's ribs. His left leg felt heavy, sluggish from the blood loss. He began to hallucinate, seeing the faces of dead men in the shadows of the pines. He saw David Cooper, the SEAL who had died to protect the dog walking in front of him. "Keep moving, Mitchell." The phantom voice seemed to whisper through the wind. "Don't let them bury the truth." As dawn began to break, painting the jagged peaks of the bitterroots in a cold, bruised purple, they reached the tree line. Below them, nestled in a steep, rocky canyon, sat a cluster of dilapidated, weather-beaten wooden structures, the old Phillipsburg silver mine. Above the largest cabin, mostly obscured by a massive array of camouflaged netting, was a cluster of high-gain satellite dishes. Abel stumbled forward, his vision narrowing to a tunnel. He had nothing left. He reached the heavy, steel-reinforced door of the main cabin and hammered his fist against it. "Elias!" Abel croaked, his voice barely a whisper. "Elias, open the door." Silence. Abel hit the door again, his knees finally buckling. He collapsed onto the snow-covered porch, his hand resting on Freya's back. A moment later, the heavy deadbolt clacked open. The door swung inward, revealing a gaunt, wild-eyed man holding a short-barreled shotgun. Elias Stanton wore a tattered wool sweater and a paranoid scowl. He looked down at Abel, then at the blood-soaked snow, and finally at the massive German shepherd standing guard over him. "You bring a lot of noise with you, Abel," Elias muttered, his eyes darting to the sky. "I brought the truth," Abel whispered. Before the world finally faded to black, Abel woke to the smell of burning sage and antiseptic. He was lying on a military cot in a room packed floor to ceiling with server racks, ham radios, and blinking monitors. The air was suffocatingly hot, heated by a massive cast-iron stove in the corner. "Don't move," a gravelly voice commanded. Elias was leaning over him, finishing a tight wrapping of fresh bandages around his ribs. "You lost a pint. Maybe two. The bullet fragment is still in there. I'm a signals guy, not a surgeon. It stays until you get to a real hospital." Abel gritted his teeth and forced himself to sit up. The pain was still there, but the dizziness had subsided. He looked around frantically. "The dogs? The asset is securing the perimeter," Elias said, nodding toward the window. Freya was sitting on the front porch, perfectly still, watching the tree line. The cargo is in the crate by the stove. They're eating. Abel let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He saw the 3 puppies eagerly lapping up a mixture of canned milk and water from a tin bowl. Elias, I need your uplink. Now. Abel swung his legs off the cot. I already pulled the SD card from your pack, Elias said, walking over to a massive custom-built terminal with 3 curved monitors. I decrypted the video file. You've kicked a hornet's nest, brother. Colonel Richard Sterling, JSOC Logistics. The man practically owns the military supply chain. Can you upload it? Abel asked, walking over to the terminal. Elias sighed, rubbing his scruffy face. It's a massive file. High-definition video, plus hundreds of pages of encrypted ledgers proving the weapons transfers to the Sinaloa cartel. I can bounce the signal through a proxy in Reykjavik, then route it through a Tor node to the major news desks and the Pentagon's secure whistleblower server. But an upload that heavy, it's going to take time. How much time? 15 minutes. Maybe 20, Elias said, his fingers flying across the keyboard. But here's the problem, Abel. To push that much data that fast, I have to open the throttle on my satellite array. It's going to create a massive electromagnetic spike. If Sterling has a hunter-killer team looking for you, and they have an AWACS or a surveillance drone in the air, they will see this cabin light up like a Christmas tree on their scopes. They're already looking for me, Abel said coldly. Do it. Elias hesitated for a fraction of a second, then hit the enter key. A progress bar appeared on the center screen. Uploading. 1%. Okay, Elias muttered. We are now the loudest thing in the Rocky Mountains. Abel grabbed his gear. He checked the action on his Remington 870. 5 shells of .00 buckshot left. He pulled out his Glock 19. 2 full magazines. It wasn't enough to hold off a dedicated assault force, but it was all he had. He walked out onto the porch. The sun was fully up now, blindingly bright against the snow. Freya looked up at him. They're coming, Sarge, Abel said. 10 minutes passed in agonizing silence. The progress bar inside crept to 45%. Then Freya stood up. The hair on the back of her neck bristled. She didn't look at the tree line. She looked up. Abel followed her gaze. At first, there was nothing but the brilliant blue of the winter sky. Then, he heard it. It wasn't a helicopter. It was a high-pitched mechanical whine, like a massive angry mosquito, a quadcopter drone. Painted matte gray, crested the ridge. It wasn't a commercial toy. It was military grade, equipped with a FLIR thermal camera and an underslung payload. Elias! Drone! Abel yelled, diving back through the doorway just as the drone banked sharply toward the cabin. A rapid series of popping sounds echoed off the canyon walls. The drone was firing 40mm tear gas canisters through the windows. The glass shattered, and thick, choking white smoke instantly filled the server room. They're blinding us. Elias coughed, pulling his shirt over his mouth. He grabbed a gas mask from a hook on the wall and tossed it to Abel, donning one himself. How much longer? Abel shouted, his voice muffled by the rubber mask. 70%, Elias yelled back. 5 minutes. Outside, the distinct whop 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 of a little bird helicopter echoed through the canyon. It didn't land. It flared just above the tree line, 100 yards from the cabin, and fast-roped 4 heavily armed operators into the deep snow. These weren't the same mercenaries from the cabin. These men wore tactical black, heavy ballistic helmets and night vision goggles. They moved with terrifying, robotic precision, the elite of the elite. Sterling had sent his personal cleanup crew. They're on the ground, Abel said, racking the shotgun. Elias, barricade the door. Do not stop. That upload. Abel moved to the shattered window. The tear gas was thick, but the freezing wind was helping to clear it. He saw the 4 operators moving up the slope in a diamond formation. They were using suppressed HK-416 assault rifles. Abel aimed the shotgun, waiting for them to cross the 50-yard line. Suddenly, the lead operator threw his hand up in a fist. The formation halted. They were communicating via secure comms. The leader pointed directly at the cabin's porch. Abel realized his mistake. He had left Freya outside. He peered through the smoke. The porch was empty. Freya was gone. "Where is she?" Abel muttered, his heart dropping. The lead operator raised his rifle, scanning the tree line. He took 2 steps forward. From the dense, snow-covered roof of the porch, a black shadow dropped like a stone. Freya hadn't run. She had climbed. Using her elite tactical training, she had bypassed the ground approach entirely. Taking the high ground, she landed squarely on the lead operator's shoulders, her 60 pounds of muscle and momentum driving him face first into the packed snow. Before the man could even scream, her jaws locked onto the heavy nylon straps of his tactical vest, dragging him backward into the brush. "Contact left. Dog," one of the operators shouted, breaking formation and turning his rifle toward the struggle. Abel didn't hesitate. He leaned out the window and fired the shotgun. The deafening blast dropped the operator in his tracks, the buckshot shredding his unarmored legs. 2 down, 2 to go. The remaining 2 mercenaries instantly laid down a withering wall of suppressing fire, shattering the remaining wood around Abel's window. Abel ducked, feeling the splinters rain down on his helmet. "Elias!" Abel yelled over the gunfire. 90%. Elias screamed back. Almost there. The gunfire suddenly stopped. Abel peeked over the sill. The 2 operators were rushing the cabin, pulling fragmentation grenades from their vests. If they threw those through the window, it was over. The servers, the puppies, the evidence, all of it would be vaporized. Abel stood up in full view, raising his Glock 19. He fired 3 rapid shots. One sparked harmlessly off the operator's ballistic helmet. The others missed entirely. The mercenary pulled the pin on the grenade and reeled back to throw. A massive, blurry shape slammed into the man from the side. Freya had circled back. She didn't bite this time. She threw her entire body weight into the man's knees. A perfect, tactical takedown. The mercenary collapsed, the live grenade slipping from his gloved hand and rolling into the snow beneath him. "Grenade!" his partner screamed, diving away. Abel ducked below the windowsill. The explosion shook the foundation of the cabin, blowing out the rest of the windows and sending a shockwave of snow and dirt into the air. Abel slowly raised his head. His ears were ringing violently, a high-pitched whine that drowned out the wind. Through the settling snow and smoke, he saw a crater where the 3rd operator had been. The 4th operator, the leader of the team, was staggering to his feet about 20 yards away. His black tactical uniform was torn, and his helmet was gone, revealing a hardened, scarred face. It was Garrett Sullivan. Abel recognized him from old JSOC briefing files. Sullivan was a legend in the Black Ops world, a man who specialized in making high-value targets disappear. Now, he was Sterling's attack dog. Sullivan didn't raise his rifle. It had been destroyed in the blast. Instead, he drew a massive, fixed-blade combat knife from his chest rig. His eyes locked onto Abel through the shattered window. "It's over, Mitchell," Sullivan shouted, his voice cutting through the ringing in Abel's ears. "You have nowhere to run. Hand over the drive, and I let the dog and the old man live. You have my word." Abel stepped out the shattered doorframe onto the ruined porch, his Glock 19 raised, the red dot sight resting squarely on Sullivan's chest. "Your word is worth nothing, Sullivan." Abel spat, blood trickling from his lip. "You killed a SEAL. You shot his dog. You sold out your country to a cartel." "I followed orders," Sullivan growled, taking a slow step forward. "Sterling runs the show. You think a little video is going to touch a man with 3 stars on his collar? The Pentagon will bury it. They'll bury you. We'll see about that," Abel said. He pulled the trigger. Click. The Glock was empty. He had lost count in the chaos. Sullivan smiled a cold, predatory grin. He charged. Abel dropped the empty pistol and drew his own combat knife. He was injured, bleeding, and exhausted, but he was still a Marine Force recon sniper. Sullivan closed the distance in seconds, lunging forward with a brutal, Underhanded thrust aimed at Abel's stomach. Abel sidestepped, ignoring the blinding pain in his ribs, and parried the strike with his left forearm. He drove the pommel of his knife into Sullivan's jaw, a sickening crunch echoing in the cold air. Sullivan stumbled back, spitting blood, but instantly recovered. He fainted high, then slashed low, his blade slicing cleanly through Abel's heavy parka and biting deep into his thigh. Abel gasped, dropping to one knee. The snow around him rapidly turned crimson. Sullivan stood over him, raising his knife for the final lethal strike. Nothing personal, Mitchell. Before Sullivan could bring the blade down, a terrifying, guttural roar ripped through the canyon. Freya emerged from the smoke like an avenging demon. She was limping heavily, her coat singed from the grenade blast, but her eyes were pure, unadulterated fury. She launched herself through the air, her jaws opening wide. She bypassed Sullivan's armored vest and clamped down squarely on his right wrist, the hand holding the knife. The force of her bite was staggering, over 800 pounds of pressure per square inch. Sullivan screamed in agony as the bones in his wrist shattered like dry twigs. The combat knife dropped harmlessly into the snow. Freya violently shook her head, dragging Sullivan to the ground. The massive mercenary thrashed and punched at the dog, but Freya's training held. She was a DEVGRU asset. She did not let go. Abel forced himself up. He grabbed the heavy wooden handle of a snow shovel resting against the porch railing and brought it down across the back of Sullivan's head. The mercenary went limp, collapsing face first into the snow. Freya instantly released her grip, panting heavily. She limped over to Abel, her tail wagging weakly, and pressed her bloody nose into his hand. Abel dropped to his knees, wrapping his arms around the massive dog, burying his face in her thick fur. "Good girl, Sarge. Good girl." The door to the cabin burst open. Elias stood there, his gas mask pushed up on his forehead, a wild, triumphant grin spreading across his face. "Upload complete," Elias yelled, waving a tablet. 100%. "It's gone, Abel." The Washington Post, the New York Times, the DoD Inspector General. It's out there. The whole damn world has it. Abel let out a long, shuddering breath. He looked up at the sky. The Little Bird helicopter, which had been circling for a landing, suddenly banked sharply and accelerated away over the mountains. They had received the abort code. Sterling's operation was blown. The hunt was over. They were safe. 2 weeks later, the sun was shining brightly over the Bitterroot Valley, reflecting off the pristine, untouched snow. Abel sat in a heavy wooden rocking chair on the porch of a newly rented cabin outside Darby. He was wearing a thick sweater, his ribs tightly taped beneath it, and he walked with a noticeable limp, but his eyes were clear. The ghosts of Kandahar were quieter now. He held a steaming mug of coffee, watching the morning news on a small, battery-powered TV resting on the railing. In a stunning development at the Pentagon, Lieutenant General Richard Sterling was taken into federal custody this morning following a massive leak of classified documents and video evidence, linking him to an international arms smuggling ring. Abel reached over and clicked the TV off. Justice for David Cooper had been served. He looked down at the snowy yard. 3 fat, clumsy German shepherd puppies were tumbling over each other in the powder, barking fiercely at a stray pine cone. Nearby, resting under the warmth of the sun, was Freya. Her leg was fully healed, the stitches removed. She lay with her head resting on her massive paws, watching the puppies with calm, protective eyes. She wasn't a tactical asset anymore. She wasn't a fugitive, and she wasn't officially dead. Abel whistled softly. "Hey, Sarge, come here." Freya stood up, stretched, and trotted up the stairs. She sat beside his chair, leaning her heavy head against his knee. Abel smiled, resting his hand on her head, looking out over the quiet, endless expanse of the mountains. He had saved a dying dog in the snow, but he knew the truth. She had saved him. What an absolutely incredible journey. The bond between a veteran and a war dog proved to be stronger than a corrupt military empire. Abel and Freya's story shows us that sometimes the bravest heroes are the ones who walk on 4 legs, and that the truth, no matter how deeply buried in the snow, will always find a way to the light. If this story of survival, loyalty, and justice kept you on the edge of your seat. Please hit that like button. It really helps the channel out. Don't forget to share this incredible tale with the dog lovers and thriller fans in your life. And make sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our next gripping, real-life inspired story. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you found Freya under your truck? See you in the next one.